is a co-founder and director of the Israeli NGO Breaking the Silence. We thank you to be here, and we thank the promoters, the people who have taken the initiative to invite Mr. Shaul to be here and to present his book, the Manifeste, Mouvement pour une paix juste et durable au Proche-Orient, d'avoir pris cette initiative d'inviter notre conférencier aujourd'hui. You will speak in English, so it will be fine like that. Before to give you the floor, I will ask you to sign our golden book. So you can see the book just on the tables if you wish. There are some copies of the book, and you will also give a conference this evening or last night. Okay. It was you gave it, so that's fine. And now I will ask you to take the floor. Yes. De toute façon. And yes, I give you the little souvenir from the Swiss Press Club, a Swiss military knife.
Thank you. I shouldn't try to take it on the plane, huh?
Yeah.
Military knife, okay.
I think you should give 5 saltines.
Yeah.
When you give a knife, you must give a coin.
It can be, yeah.
I'm not superstitious.
According to some traditions, yes, it could be. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, fine.
Thank you again, all the friends in the Manifeste, and you for agreeing to host us. I'll maybe say a few words about where I come from. I'll try to do it very short because I still want to focus most of my time on the book, because at the end of the day, I think it's way more interesting than me. So I'm basically 30 years old. I'm from Jerusalem. I was privileged to be one of the people who started Breaking the Silence. We started Breaking the Silence in June 2004. After getting out of service, I served in the IDF from March 2001 till March 2004 as a combat soldier and a commander. And as I left the military, together with 65 of my comrades, we started Breaking the Silence. The first act of Breaking the Silence was a photo exhibit and video testimonies that we've done in Tel Aviv about our experience in Hebron, which is the largest Palestinian city in the West Bank, where I served for over a year. And the idea behind this was more or less to try to bring back home to our own society the stories of what we've done in their name in the occupied territories. And putting our photos from our photo albums on the wall to try to tell the reality in Hebron was the way to bring our understanding of what's going on in the occupied territories to our fellow citizens in Israel. And it was the impact that this exhibit had in Israel, which was quite huge. Over 7,000 people came to visit the gallery. We were invited to present the exhibit in the Israeli parliament for a full month after. We were the story of, if we're in a media place, so we were the story back then of the country for a week. Together with the fact that we met other veterans who served in other units and had the same stories and the same photos to show, was what brought us to continue Breaking the Silence until today. And here we are 9 years after. In Breaking the Silence today, we are a group of over 950 people, men and women, who served as conscripts from the beginning of the Second Intifada till today. All of us basically contributed our own testimony, our own story of what we've done in uniform in the occupied territories to the archive of Breaking the Silence. And what we do as an organization is mainly two things. One is follow up, document these testimonies verify them, research them, and publish them in different ways. And this book is just an example. There is more on our website and in other publications we've done in the past. And the second thing we do is we try to use our personal experience and the testimonies we gather as an educational and an advocacy tool. So a lot of lectures, discussions, talks, guided tours to the field in the West Bank, either to Hebron or to the south of Hebron. And the idea is very simple, to try to force a public debate in Israel about the moral price tag of maintaining a prolonged occupation. Yeah, it's coming back home from the occupied territories as soldiers and holding up a mirror in front of our society and demanding from our society to take moral and civil responsibility for what is being done in its name. It's obvious we're against the occupation. I don't feel I need to mention it even. Otherwise, there was no reason to do what we do. We have this weird belief, and forgive me for being a bit cynical around it, but we believe that people should rule themselves and not be controlled by military. And people should have a voice, an equal voice, in determining under which regime they live, and not live for 46 years under military control with nothing to say about it. So this is, in a way, in a nutshell, what Breaking the Silence is all about. I'll try, as I said, I'll try to give more attention to the book, so I'll kind of like try to dive in to what this book is all about. This book is quite something new for Breaking the Silence. Okay? Up to now, up to 4 years ago when we started working on this book, the way we've published stuff was, we would decide internally in Breaking the Silence about a topic, an issue that we think that it's important to shed light on. For example, the IDF rules of engagement. Operation Cast Light in Gaza, yeah, the big operation in 2009. Experience of female soldiers, or treatment of Palestinian children and minors in the occupied territories, yeah? So you will just choose a topic, compile some testimonies, yeah? 20, 30, 50 soldiers, 20, 30, 50 stories by different soldiers on the topic, put it together as a booklet and publish it, try to get some media attention, try to get some conversation. You know, this is what soldiers said they've done. This is what they testified about what they've seen. Let's have a conversation. What do we as a society think about it? It was around 4 years ago, as we were approaching the 10th anniversary of the Second Intifada, and after interviewing over 700 people, we felt that we could actually say something more than just publishing the testimonies. And that something more was an attempt by us to try to tell the story of how the Israeli military is controlling Palestinians. Again, through the perspective of ground troops. Yeah, that's the perspective that we can speak about. There's many more instruments of control that Israel has over Palestinians that we don't have access to. Yeah, not to the Secret Service, and not for the judiciary system, and not for a lot of other things. But after interviewing over 700 people from all units who served in the occupied territories, at least from the perspective of the military, it's something that we can understand and know pretty well. And in a way, this book is a result of that project. So we published a book in Hebrew 3 years ago, and since then till today, it was translated to, I think, 4 or 5 different languages. English, German, Dutch, and now it's French, Swedish, and I think that's more or less covering it. But maybe a bit about the book itself, what there is in the book. So as I said, it's an attempt to try to tell the story of how does the Israeli military operate on a day-to-day basis. When we came to try to answer this question, when we came to try to come up with the result of this question, we came from the perspective that we grew up on. As Jewish Israelis, we grew up on believing that Israel's military activities in the occupied territories are there to defend Israel from terrorism. Yeah, we all know there are terrorists to the other side. There were terrorist attacks against Israel. And what the military is doing is to defend the country from terrorism. That's what we grew we were brought up on, that's what we believed. And in a way, you know what? You can say not only we're defending Israel, we're not defending only Israel, we're defending also the settlements. Yeah, now, one can argue that the settlements are illegal, politically it's wrong, morally it's wrong, whatever the argument you bring to the table, but at the end of the day, they're citizens of the state of Israel, and as long we don't have a solution to the conflict, they still live there, and they deserve our protection. And that's why what we're doing is we're defending the state of Israel, and we're defending them. Yeah, so to speak, what the military is doing in our eyes is playing defense, yeah, in our actions in the occupied territories. The thing is that as you start to go through all the testimonies and start to put the picture together, yeah, very quick you understand that playing defense is a very, very small part of what we do in the occupied territories. Yeah, what we're mainly doing is we're playing offense. Yeah, in a way, most of what we do as a military in the occupied territories is to make sure, maintain, and strengthen, and preserve our absolute military control over Palestinians. Yeah, so if in a way, on the political level, there is many conversations, and a lot of people talking it with a language, using a language, a framework, as if Israel is on the way out. Yeah, we are on the way out to leave the territories, and the only question on the table is just finding the right time, the right date, and the right way of doing it. What actually is happening on the ground is exactly the opposite. Yeah, we're just digging in more and more. Now, we don't have the time because I don't want to take all the time. I want to leave some more time for questions. So I won't really be able to lay down all the argument. But maybe I'll explain a bit about the methodology, how we worked, and give one or two examples that can basically pave our road to get there. The way we've done this work is we've divided all Israel's military activity in the occupied territories into 4 pillars, code names, titles, strategies. And these are basically the 4 chapters of the book. And what we do is, all these code names, all these titles that are the chapters of the book, are words that the average Israeli, definitely the average Israeli soldier, is very familiar with them. And what we're trying to do is to decode these code words, in a sense, to try to compare what the average Israeli hears, listens to, yeah, thinks of when he hears these code names, and what they actually mean if you listen to the soldiers' testimonies. Okay, and that's basically how, step after step, we construct our argument. The 4 titles, the 4 chapters of the book are, the first chapter is sikul in Hebrew, prevention in English. The second chapter is Fada Separation. The third chapter is Mirkam Chaim, fabric of life. I don't know how many of you have heard this phrase before. I think you need to be more from inside the system to be familiar with this phrase. And the 4th chapter is law enforcement. And these are all, as I said again, these are all code words that the average Israeli soldier will right away recognize. Yeah? And right away at least have a thought, an idea of what he thinks they mean. So let's go through the first chapter, for example, what the average Israeli thinks when he hears the word sikul, prevention. So the Hebrew word sikul, the most common use of this word, that means prevention, sounds very defensive, right? Preventing something from happening. What can be more defensive than that? Especially if it's preventing something very, very bad from happening. So the most common way we use this word is with the phrase sikul memukad, targeted prevention. Don't know if you've heard this phrase before. What is targeted prevention? This is the code name we use in the Israeli media for assassinations. Okay, so the scenario you have in your mind is the ticking bomb scenario. There is the suicide bomber with a belt. He's on the way to blow up a bus. We cannot arrest him. So what do? We send a chopper, we send a drone, we take him out from the air, and we targetedly prevent him. That's how we save lives. That's the only option on the table. So we've done the right thing. So really what the average Israeli hears when he hears sikul, prevention, is something that he thinks is very defensive, as I said. But actually the truth is that if you listen to soldiers' testimonies to what prevention is all about, you understand that the concept of prevention today is so wide in the military that every defensive act you can think of, and almost every offensive act you can think of, is considered by the military as prevention, as defense. And this is something you can say in every military tactic that we have on the ground. So let's go through a few examples, because I've already mentioned assassinations, so let's follow that up. So when you assassinate people, you start with assassinating people that you cannot arrest. And that's basically your only way to take them out of the picture. And then you move on to assassinating people that you can arrest, but by assassinating them and not arresting them, you leave a greater impact on what's happening. And then you move on to assassinating people just for revenge. Okay, there are a few revenge attacks throughout the Second Intifada. Maybe give you an example that appears in the book. It was in February 19th or February 17th, I don't remember exactly the date. There was an attack on an IDF checkpoint near Ramallah called avec. In that attack, 6 engineer soldiers of the IDF were killed. The following night, 3 different special forces units were sent to revenge. The orders were very clear. 2 o'clock, Palestinian police checkpoints. Anyone at the checkpoint is doomed to die. Doesn't matter if he's in uniform or not, if he's armed or not. 1 unit operating in Gaza, 1 unit in Ramallah, 1 in Nablus. The orders were very clear. They took 6, we're going to take some. At the end of the evening, 15 Palestinian policemen were killed. 2 soldiers who participated in the attack of Ramallah are members of Breaking the Silence. 2 soldiers who participated in the attack in Nablus are members of Breaking the Silence. One of them was actually an officer leading that attack. Yeah, this is a story that is covered from all angles. This is also not a story about one officer that kind of like lost control. Yeah, if you understand the way the chain of command in the IDF works, you understand that in order to have a simultaneous attack in Gaza and in the West Bank, which means in the territory of the Central Command, but also in the territory of the Southern Command, yeah, the order needs to come out from at least the Deputy Chief of Staff, if not higher, if not the political level at all. And again, this is not a unique case. But let's go on the next tactic. Arrest. You start with arresting bad guys because you want to prevent stuff from happening, you want to get intelligence, and then you move on to arrest cousins of bad guys because you want some information or you want to put some pressure on the families. And then you go on to what we call mass arrests. You go into a village, round up all the men from the age of 30 to 50, from 20 to 60. Yeah, different days, different times, different places, different numbers. Stakeouts. You get intelligence about an attack that is going to take place on the road. You want to prevent it from happening, right? Prevention. So you put snipers. If someone will come, you'll be able to take him out. But there is a problem. This village, kids are throwing stones, and you want to put an end to this. So what do? enter in the middle of the night into the village near the school, take over a house, do what we call a straw widow, which is the military code name for an ambush in urban areas. Take over a house quietly, lock the family in a room, disconnect the phones, put snipers on the street, on the windows. 8 o'clock, school starts. You send the military jeep near the school. Now, what happens when many Palestinian kids see a military vehicle? They start to throw stones. They have no idea there are snipers 200 meters away in the tall building there in the end of the road. You start to shoot in the knees. That's how you teach them a lesson. And I can go on with many, many other examples yet to show you how every tactic can be on the extreme of the defense and on the extreme of the offense. Okay, they were actually, sometimes you use forces as baits, even worse than that. I don't know how many of you have military background, but usually a tank, in the back of the tank there is a door. Yeah, and there's kind of like a corridor at the end of the tank where you can pull out wounded from battle, wounded soldiers from battle. So one of the things you do, for example, again, we're talking about the same concept of stakeouts. Open the door. Instead of having a wounded soldier, have there a sharpshooter, which is a sniper for shorter distance. Drive through the city center. Behind the tank, put another APC or another tank. An APC is an armored personnel carrier. It's like a tank without a cannon that we use to move around troops. On a tank or an APC, there is machine guns outside. When you drive in the city, of course, you're closed in, but the machine guns are out. And if you drive slowly, kids can try to climb on the APC and take off the weapons. They have no idea that 20 meters before, in the tank, the back door is open and there is someone who is willing to shoot anyone who will touch the machine gun. So they climb on the APC, they touch it, boom. Yeah, just another example of what happens when prevention as a stakeout is being implemented. And maybe I would say the peak of this concept of prevention is what we call in the military making our presence felt. I don't know how many of you have heard this phrase. The military concept says this. If Palestinians will get the feeling that the IDF is all the time everywhere, they'll be afraid to attack. So what do you do to make them feel this way? You make your presence felt. So I'll bring an example from Hebron, a Palestinian city where I served for over a year. Right now, as we are talking, there are 2 military patrols that their mission is to make their presence felt. Start your night shift patrol, 10 o'clock at night till 6 o'clock in the morning. Walk in the streets of the old city. Bump into a house. Of course, a Palestinian house. Now, it's not a house we have intelligence about, yeah? When we go to a house according to intelligence, we call it something else. That's not these patrols. I'm the sergeant, I lead the patrol, I choose a random house, wake up the family, men one side, women the other side, search the building, the apartment. You can yourself imagine the dynamics, what happens when a military unit breaks into a house at 1 o'clock at night, and how the children and the babies react and all the rest of the family. You finish searching the house, you go out to the street, throw some shock grenades, make some noise, run to the other corner of the street, invade another house, wake up the family, and basically one after the other, that's basically how you pass your 8-hour shift. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, from September 2000 when the second Intifada started, till today it didn't stop for 1 second. Yeah, the idea is very simple. Every Palestinian needs to feel the military is right here. You never know when we're going to show up, what we're going to do, how it's going to look like, how many we're going to be, when it's going to end. It's to do what we call in the military, litzor tchushat nirdafut, to create the feeling of being persecuted. I'll maybe finish with another tactic, and that's the last one that I'll speak about in this chapter. It's what we call mock arrests. Mock arrest is actually a tactic that we've been hearing more and more in the last few years as the West Bank becomes more and more safe for Israeli soldiers, right? Because the threat to Israeli soldiers today in the field, not even close to what it was in the time that I was in uniform. Yeah, the peak of the Second Intifada. So what is a mock arrest? You have a new unit in town. Yeah, they just finished training, the first time they're deployed in the field. You don't want the first arrest operation they do to be the real thing. So what do? You send them on a mock arrest. Choose the most peaceful, quiet Palestinian village in the area where you're based. Open the aerial photo, and a photo from the area of the village. Choose a random house. Pick up the phone, call the Secret Service, the Shin Bet. Make sure that the guy living in the house you've chosen is innocent, and that by operating on him, you're not interfering in intelligence gathering and other operations that the Shin Bet has in the area. Once you get the go, meaning he's innocent, and you're not interfering in Secret Service operations in the area, you come in the middle of the night, you surround the house, grab the guy as if it's a real arrest. After 5 minutes, 20 minutes, 15 minutes, someone goes on the radio, says, end of exercise, stop the jeep, release the guy, go back to the base, and go to sleep. So you probably wonder, why the hell do we do this? Yeah, if we know the person is innocent, so why? And the truth is, the soldiers who are sent to carry out these operations are asking the same questions. You're not alone. And you know what the answers they usually get? Two. The first one is very simple. Why we do it? For training. Training is very important. As close training can be to reality, better. So if you can do it in a real Palestinian village, in a real Palestinian house, in a real Palestinian man. But the second reason they hear, and that I think even becomes more interesting, is that a mock arrest is an advanced way of making your presence felt. Think of it. You enter to the village in the middle of the night, people wake up. They realize the military is here. They remember that we are right here, right? And then they see you arresting a person that they know is innocent. And they start to ask questions, why the hell are you arresting him? He's an innocent guy. And then they see you're releasing him. So they even don't understand more. Like, so why did you release? Is he a collaborator? What the hell is going on here? And they don't find the answer, so they're even more scared. Right? Because when you understand the rules of the game, you can actually decide whether you want to play or not. But when you don't know what's waiting around the corner, that's when you're really, really terrified. Yeah, this is actually why the name of the chapter is Intimidating the Palestinian Population Prevention. Yeah? Because when the idea is intimidation of everyone all the time, everywhere, in a sense you are in a reality where the lack of order is the perfect order. Yeah, the lack of logic is the perfect logic. Yeah, and that's basically why our American publisher has called the book Our Harsh Logic. Yeah, that's how the English title of the book is. But until now, we've only spoken about how you prevent. What about the question, what it is that you're trying to prevent? Which is, I think, also an important question to be asked. Are we preventing only terrorism, or are we preventing other things? No, the concept of prevention is what we are preventing is basically the idea is constant intimidation of everyone all the time in order to make sure that nothing comes to their mind. And that nothing doesn't only include terrorism, that nothing starts and ends with anything that will challenge our absolute rule over Palestinians. No one can look seriously into my eyes and tell me, I don't know how many of you are familiar, but there is what we call the popular resistance in the West Bank. There are a bunch of villages that every Friday march out to the streets, towards the separation barrier, to the fields, to a nearby settlement, whatever. And no one can look into my eyes and tell me that 50 people with flags are a security threat to the state of Israel. They are definitely a very serious strategic threat to the absolute rule of Israel over Palestinians. Yeah? And that's why they're supposed to be met with the same toolbox that we have in order to control the people there. So wherever you challenge us more, you basically face more response from us. And if I leave for a second the military language and I go into the human rights world, we are in Geneva, you know this very scary phrase that we call collective punishment in the framework of human rights and international law. If you really understand what prevention is all about, you understand that collective punishment is not a result of what we do. Collective punishment is not an indirect outcome of what we do. Collective punishment is the heart that beeps at the heart of what prevention is all about. Because the intimidation is on everyone, all the time, everywhere. Because there is nothing a Palestinian can do in order not to be intimidated, right? Because that's the only way we make sure that nothing crosses his mind to rise up against us. If we always keep on pushing, You know, during the time I served in Hebron, the security situation was really bad. From June 2002 to June 2003, 20 Israelis were killed in the city of Hebron, including 2 people from my unit, from my brigade. Since June 2003 till today, only 1 soldier was killed in Hebron a few weeks ago. A complete different security situation. But you know what was the mission on a briefing wall in 2009? 6 years, no Israeli killed. The mission statement on a briefing wall in one of the barracks in Hebron was, and I'm literally translating, to disrupt the day-to-day routine of people living in the neighborhood. Yeah? And this is what I mean, what are we preventing? Yeah? The concept is very simple. If you don't keep on pushing, you never know what's going to happen. What thoughts will cross through their mind. That's why you must keep on pushing all the time, everywhere, everyone. Now, as I said, I want to leave more time to questions. So I'll very, very quick scan through the rest of the book and open it for questions. Not going to talk about everything. The second chapter of the book is called Fada Separation. And when people in Israel say Fada Separation, the first thing we think of is, you know, Palestinians will be in Palestine, Israelis in Israel, we'll have a 2-state solution, peace comes to the Middle East, and what's the problem? Isn't that what we all desire? But if you listen to testimonies of soldiers, you understand that separation is not all about separating Israelis and Palestinians. Separations is first and foremost separating Palestinians from Palestinians. It's first and foremost is a divide and conquer. Through administrative issues, through permits regime, through physical obstacle, like checkpoints, like the separation barrier, like other stuff. Yeah, the idea is basically break things apart. What's interesting actually is that sometimes if you're not a soldier and you come to the West Bank, some stuff that you see, you actually think that they are about separation. But in some cases, tactics that we think are serving separation are actually about prevention. I'll explain what I mean with an example so it will make sense, the sentence I just said. I'll give you an example from my time in the military, my company. My last tour of duty was outside of Bethlehem, in the center of the West Bank, near a Palestinian village called Hussan, west of Bethlehem. And one morning, patrol is out there, morning shift from 6 o'clock till 2 o'clock. And the mission is, you go and do what we call a strangulation checkpoint on Hussan. What is that? As it sounds, strangulation checkpoint. Go to the entrance of the village, block it. No vehicle gets in, no vehicle gets out. Of course, it comes in a surprise to the village. Dozens of cars try to get out. Dozens of cars try to come home back in. But you are there and you're blocking it. No one goes in, no one goes out. 8-hour shift of the morning ends at 2 o'clock. So 1:45, you get the call on the radio from headquarters. Fold everything, come back to the base. So you ask, but what's going to happen? There's dozens of cars there. The second I go into the Jeep, everybody crosses in and out. I say, don't worry, it's okay, it's fine. The next shift will come 45 minutes after, we'll close it again. So you start to wonder, what the hell's going on here? If it is so important that no one leaves the village today with a vehicle, why the hell we're giving them these 45 minutes that they can all go in and out? What the hell is going on here? And that's what happens, because at 1:45 you leave, and at 2:30 the next shift will come and block it again. And that's when you understand that the story is not that no one leaves the village with a vehicle today. The story is very simple. No one leaves the village when we decide that no one leaves the village. The third chapter, and that's the last one, I think I'm going to ignore the fourth one. Law enforcement, I think we're not going to talk it. That's how you have an incentive to buy the book. But the third chapter is fabric of life. Yeah, just because it's a code word, a code name that not many people are familiar with, so I thought I'm not going to wrap things up without mentioning and explaining what it is. Fabric of life is actually a phrase that was invented around 2004. And what is fabric of life intended to tell us? It's intended to tell us a story that says this. Actually, if you are a good Palestinian, if you're a good human being, Palestinian, lives in the occupied territories, your life under occupation is actually quite decent. Definitely a life worth living, yeah? Look, if you're a terrorist, of course we don't want you to have a good life, right? That's obvious. But if you're actually not involved in terrorism, your life will be decent. How and why? For a very simple reason. Because in every military action we take in the occupied territories, we take that action while making sure to leave the least harm possible on the fabric of your life. Okay? That's where the phrase comes from. So I think by now, after explaining what prevention is and what separation is, we understand already what the fabric of life of a normal, random Palestinian in the street in the West Bank is, yeah? Life full of prevention, life full of separation. And I think an interesting exercise would be is to ask ourselves for a minute if we would agree to exchange seats with people who live under prevention and separation for 5 minutes, not for a day. But even more interesting, I think, is this. This is the first time we publish testimonies of what we call in the military the civil administration. I don't know if you've heard about the civil administration. There's nothing civilian about the civil administration, don't worry. When we close our eyes and we try to imagine what is a military occupation, what is Israel's occupation over Palestinians, the image that will probably come to your mind is a soldier standing in a checkpoint with a gun. But actually, that's a very, very small part of what the military occupation is. Military occupation is basically living under a government that is a military, that is not yours. So the image that we have of the occupation, the soldier standing in a checkpoint, is actually just one department under the Ministry of Defense. But what about the customs authorities? That's the military. And what about the transportation minister? It's actually the military commander. And what about the Minister of Justice? It's actually the same person, the military commander. And what about the Minister of Agriculture? It's the same person again. It's the military commander. Yeah, he's basically everything. And he rules you. So I think it would be very difficult to find another example of a military occupation that the military commanders have been dealing so deep and so wide into administrating the life of the people under occupation. It is not that we're doing everything, of course not. There's the PA, even better, easier for us in some way. But we definitely preserve the right to interfere when we want, how we want, however we think is necessary. And what is very, very clear, if you listen to testimonies of soldiers and officers from the civil administration, you understand that if you come from a humanitarian perspective, you don't really have to worry. Don't worry, Israel is not going to take it to the extreme. This is not how you keep reality of occupation sustainable. People are not going to die in the street from hunger. That doesn't go in favor of us. I don't know how many of you remember the publication about a mathematical calculation of calories of how much food goes into Gaza to make sure that there is enough to survive. But anything more than the basic needs of people is up in the air, given and taken at the grace of the occupier. You behave nice, you get rewarded. You piss us off, we take it away. And this is something we can see from the tiny stories on the ground to the biggest political issues that are on the table. You throw stones from this village and settler cars on the road. Working permits of the people from the village in Israel will be cancelled for 2 weeks. No one is going to starve, but the people in the village will get the message. You throw stones and settlers driving on the road. The entrance to the village will be blocked. No cars in and out for 2 weeks. Again, you'll be able to walk. It's not we put you on a closure. It's not that bad. But you'll get the message. Until we can get to the highest political example, which is we collect taxes for the Palestinian Authority. They go to the UN and piss us off. We don't give it to them. But 6 months after, if not less, they're on the verge of a financial crisis and collapsing. We give them an advance. Not only do we pay back the money we withhold from them, but we give them an advance because we don't want them to collapse. You know, we are used to think on the Palestinian Authority as something that has power. You know, Abbas we call a president. Salam Fayyad we call a prime minister. There's a Palestinian village called Susia in the south of Hebron, near one of the Hebron suburbs called Yatta. And near Susia, less than 100 meters, there was a village called Umnil, a very small village, 5 families. Umnil is a Palestinian village that was demolished completely by the Israeli army 5 times within a year and a half. And after the 4th time, Salam Fayyad came to visit. We call him a prime minister, right? This is a scene I'll never forget in my life. He came to visit the village of Umnil, which is across the street of Susia, as I said, less than 100 meters away. After visiting Umnil, the people there, he wanted to cross and take a visit to Susia. There was a 19-year-old soldier in uniform and told him no. We didn't coordinate in advance that path. Crossing the street is forbidden for you. But he is the prime minister reminding you. But there is a 19-year-old kid in uniform. No. That kid doesn't even need to be a sergeant, not even to speak about being an officer, not to speak about being a general. So I think I've laid down a bit of the argument at least. I just want to finish one last thing. One last thing. And that is to say, you know, publishers, they have a commercial interest. And when they come to give a title to a book, like our French publisher, yeah, they choose a title that will sell, probably. But when we wrote this book, we've chosen not a title that will sell, but a title that will tell. The Hebrew book we called Kibush Ashtachim. Yeah, it's very difficult to translate it, but if I would translate it literally, it won't have the same meaning. But if I translate it literally, it's the occupation of the territories. Because what we tried to say is that for a lot of people, the Israeli occupation is something that took place in June 1967. There was a war, territory was conquered by Israel, and that's when the Israeli occupation happened. And what we're saying is, if you really understand what's happening on the ground, you understand that no. The Israeli occupation, again, is actually an ongoing, prolonged, offensive attack. It's something that is happening every second, everywhere in the occupied territories, all the time. Because every house you build in a settlement, you reoccupy the territories. And every Palestinian house you break in the middle of the night to disrupt the routine of the people in the neighborhood, you reoccupy the territories. And every random checkpoint you put to block an entrance to a village and disturb the routine of the people in the village, the territories are being reoccupied. And it is something that is happening all the time, everywhere. Yeah, I think if you accept that, if you understand this, yeah, it gives a whole new meaning to this phrase that we hear a lot, which is a status quo. Yeah, status quo is not a frozen piece of ice in the freezer. Yeah, the status quo is an entrenchment, yeah, digging in. Yeah, this is where we started.
Okay. So thank you very much for your presentation. You gave us very interesting examples of what happens in the territories. So thank you for that. Yes, thank you for that. Maybe just a lot of questions. Maybe a first one. When it was published the first time, 3 years ago in
2010 in Israel, yeah.
Ah, yeah. And does it change? Did your book change anything in the behavior on the ground, or not yet? How was the book received in Israel?
I think these are two different questions. Yeah. Did it change anything on the ground? I don't believe so, no. Or I would even be more accurate and I say I know that it didn't. Yeah. How the book is perceived in Israel, the truth is that when we put together this book, we didn't think of it as a book, the way it is today put. This was a document for advocacy for us. Yeah, this was a kind of like, you know, a document to bring up an argument and work with it. So we didn't really think of it as something that is supposed to be wide distributed. Okay. We thought of it something that needs to go to decision makers, to experts who deal with the topic. And most of our work was this kind of like one-on-one meetings with, you know, sitting with columnists, with important academics, parliament members, and give them the book and lay down the argument and hope and see how they respond and what they will do with it. I think this cliche that books have a life of their own is kind of like something that happened without our intention. Yeah, there were a few columns here, a few reviews there, and suddenly it becomes a book that is, you know, distributed all over. Are people in Israel willing to accept this analysis completely and internalize it and get to a place where they will rethink their political perceptions on things, I think that we are far away still from there. Because I think that if you really understand what this book is about, you really understand what the behavior on the ground leaves behind, I think it in a very serious way, it challenges the political paradigm we live in today, and it demands from us stuff. It demands from us stuff that we cannot, or that, you know, that are pretty, I would say, pretty serious. And I don't see, sadly enough, I don't see enough political leaders willing to take that into calculation.
Okay. Yes,
Thank you for the presentation. My name is Gabriele Bear. I have to leave, unfortunately, in a second, so I have to apologize ahead of time. I had a question concerning the authorities, the Israeli authorities. When your book was released, did you have any sanctions to suffer? Was there anything against what we would call human rights, liberty of expression, and freedom of speech?
Breaking the silence does not suffer from the Israeli authorities and these things. No, I know for a lot of people it's a bit hard to understand, but I think that's Israel. Israel is a place where you have this, and when you have this, yeah, you have what we are doing in the occupied territories, and we have the possibility, as Breaking the Silence, to print this book. And I think it's important that we understand it. Yeah, after all, we are Israeli Jews, and we have privileges that Palestinians in the occupied territories, of course, are far away from having. Yeah, so I think, yeah, Israel is these two things. So we don't face I don't think, anything serious.
So the state behaves as a human democracy, as a in that context.
Again, definitely in the context of allowing us to speak what's on our mind, 90+% of the time, yes. You know, in this recent, in the previous government, which was actually a bit less right-wing than this one, we did see some attempts of the government to pass legislation to shrink the space of civil society to operate in Israel. It didn't happen, and I think that's a testimony for the influence of international pressure. The reason why these legislations didn't pass is because the world said, you know, enough is enough. And thank God my country didn't go down the road of entering the very important family of countries like China and Russia, and their treatment of human liberties of their own citizens. But again, one must remember, after saying this, that after all, Israel is a very young country. But for over 2/3 of the years of the time that our state exists, our national project is controlling the Palestinian people under military regime. Okay, so yeah, so there is one thing in the West Bank and there is another thing inside Israel.
Are you still proud to be Israeli, and do you want to stay there?
Maybe I will give the floor to other people.
I'll just answer this because I think it's an important question. The answer is yes, I'm an Israeli and I will definitely live there till the end of my life. I'm not planning to leave. Look, that's my home. And if other Israelis have a problem with my opinions, they're more than welcome to leave.
Thank you.
Could you tell us something about the Palestinians being forced into collaboration?
Look, the system of occupation, of course, is using many crossing points and many opportunities to try to force people to cooperate with it. But this is actually an issue that is in the responsibility of the Secret Service. This is not something that is the responsibility of serving soldiers on the ground. And that's why anything to do with what the Secret Service does is not really something that legally is allowed to be discussed. So this is something that I'm afraid I will have to remain silent about. It's very important for me to understand that you understand that breaking the silence is not about revealing state secrets. Yeah? People actually don't know it, but every word Breaking the Silence publishes goes through military censorship. I know that for you, military censorship sounds very scary, but actually, It's probably the most progressive body in the Israeli government. And as long you don't touch what is very clear, classified issues, you don't have problems. So that's why, you know, I don't want to harm the security of my country.
Yes. How do you see a settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian problem? Any hope for a peaceful settlement? What is your opinion?
These are two different questions. How do I see a settlement, and is there hope? I'll tell you. The problem is that when you ask the question, how do I see a settlement, and is there hope? Way before you answer the question, I think what we need to understand is what is in the question. What is the Israeli-Palestinian problem? Yeah? And in that sense, there is two different things that we tend to confuse. One, there is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and the other thing is the Israeli occupation over Palestinians. Now, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a bilateral issue. It has two sides. And with this, I'm almost completely with my Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu. It didn't start today, not yesterday, not in 67, not in 48. Yeah, it started, what was it, 1897 in Basel? There is two nations, one a homeland, in the same piece of land, we have a conflict. Now, I can understand why we would want both sides to sit down and negotiate the end of the conflict around the table instead of killing each other. Makes sense to me. You know, we're in 2013, we're adults. Better we should discuss things around the table than killing each other. Makes sense. The only problem is that the Israeli occupation is not a bilateral issue. It's a unilateral issue. We occupy Palestinians. And now I want to ask a question. Why the hell are we allowed to do that? Who the hell gave us the right to strip a whole people from their dignity for 46 years? Why the hell Palestinians need to negotiate their freedom from us?
Ok, vas-y, merci. Si vous pouvez vous présenter aussi, c'est bien. Puis appuyez sur le bouton. Bouton qui se trouve devant.
Voilà. Mais je vais parler en français, si quelqu'un peut traduire. Je m'appelle Massia Kahneman et je suis membre et représentante de J. Cole Switzerland, qui fait partie d'un mouvement juif européen qui milite pour la solution à deux États, Israël et Palestine, vivant dans des frontières sûres, reconnues internationalement. Bien que je connaisse ce que vous avez raconté, ça va au-delà en plus de ce que je pensais. Ma question est la suivante. Vous parlez devant des publics que je vois et que je perçois comme essentiellement non juifs. Ma question c'est, est-ce que vous avez été invité, est-ce que vous avez déjà parlé devant des communautés juives européennes qui sont traditionnellement, qui soutiennent traditionnellement la politique israélienne? Et il me semble, nous, en tant que J. Cole, nous essayons précisément d'aller, avec beaucoup de difficultés, devant ces communautés juives. Il me semble qu'un discours comme le vôtre pourrait bouleverser, peut-être même faire une prise de conscience parmi les juifs de ces communautés.
Thank you, merci. So the question, Mrs. Kahneman, comes from a movement called J. Cole Switzerland, who is militating for two states, two independent states collaborating and living together. And the question was, do you speak usually for non-Jewish people, non-Jewish communities, but are you also accustomed to speak with before Jewish committees or diaspora or NGOs? And do you think it can change the opinion of these people about the problem and the situation in the territories. How is your statement received by the Jewish communities in Europe?
So the answer to this question is, first of all, you need to understand that in Breaking the Silence as an Israeli organization, most of our work is in Israel. Okay? The vast majority of our work is in Israel. That's where we see our importance is and our role is. Yeah, we are an Israeli group and we work in Israel. Yeah, we do work also a bit outside of Israel. And we do work a lot with diaspora Jewish communities, and I think diaspora Jewish communities have a huge, huge, huge role to play in influencing the political situation, because it is, you know, I always say, or I'll say it in a different way. I think I see the act of breaking the silence as an act of taking responsibility. Yeah? Because when I understood what's happening, there was not much I can do apart from taking responsibility over it. But I think responsibility doesn't start and end with being an ex-soldier who speaks out about his own experiences. Responsibility starts and ends with being a human being. Yeah? But it's not just with being a human being. I think responsibility is circles of responsibility. Yeah? And at the center stands me as a person who was in the occupied territories conducting the occupation. But then there's the other circles. It's my family. It's my society. Yeah? Because I didn't wake up at the age of 18 and decided to go and have fun in Hebron. Right? As I said earlier today. Yeah? I was sent by my society. And the next circle of responsibility is the Jewish people. Because if Israel is a Jewish state, and I believe that Israel should be a Jewish state, yeah? So every Jew has a stock, yeah, in this company. And when we do what we do in the occupied territories is in your name. Now you are in a place where you need to decide. Do you agree with it or not? If you agree with it, so we disagree. But if you don't agree with it, that means we share the same values. We have the same idea of what a Jewish state in 2013 should look like and should behave. Yeah? And that's why you have our moral and civil responsibility, political responsibility to voice out your concern and your disagreement. Yeah? I would even argue more than that. I think the only way for Israel to survive is to end the occupation. Yeah? This is a cancer that will destroy the body from within. Yeah? And the only way for Israel to survive is to make sure the occupation is a foreign organ to our body. And that's why I think we have, in a way, we have responsibilities for two ways. One is because the discussion that is on the table is who we are as a people and what we should stand for. And because this is the only way to continue in existing.
Oui, Rachel. Oui, juste pour répondre à Madame Kahneman, donc le manifeste qui avons fait venir Yehuda, nous l'avions invité la première fois en 2006 lors de la semaine qu'on avait organisée à la Comédie israélo-palestinienne. C'était la première fois que Breaking the Silence sortait d'Israël et nous avions organisé avec le manifeste une soirée avant le début de cette semaine à la Comédie avec la communauté juive, dans la communauté juive, avec une trentaine de personnes invitées, dont la communauté juive traditionnelle, hein, pas libérale, avec le grand rabbin, avec les différents dirigeants des dicastères et de la communauté juive. Et c'était une soirée privée et fermée où ils ont pu parler avec Yehuda et avec un autre soldat qui était également là. Donc, en fait, le manifeste essaye de travailler effectivement toujours avec les deux communautés, c'est-à-dire aussi bien arabes et palestiniennes que juives. Et le travail que fait Yehuda est extrêmement important pour nous au sein de notre propre communauté. Très bien. Juste préciser, pour ceux qui ne le savent pas, que Rachel Babecoff, oui, je suis la coprésidente juive du Manifeste. Et voilà le coprésident arabe du Manifeste.
I just wanted to add one more thing for what I told you before, is I hope that you don't understand me in a way that I think that this is an internal Jewish or an internal Israeli issue. No. This is not, yeah? Yeah, this is way behind the scope of our communities. Yeah? This is something that everyone has responsibility. I'm just saying that we have more responsibility.
Oui.
Daniel Vernus, journalist. I would like to ask you about the role of Switzerland, or the role it could play, referring, for example, to the Geneva Initiative, which you might have heard of, I suppose. Well, now it seems to be stuck, but anyway, how do you see that this country, and more broadly this human rights community here in Geneva, could help you to go forward with your statements?
You say the Geneva Convention, the Geneva Initiative. You said the Geneva Initiative, and these things. Look, I don't know enough about the role that Switzerland plays, in global politics and in bilateral relations with Israel and with Palestinians. That's not what I'm an expert of. I'm a very good expert on how the Israeli occupation operates. And that's kind of like the chair that I try to take. I'm not here to give recommendations. I'm not here to give ideas. I'm here to kind of like, I would say, bring a cry from the field and say, this is what's happening, and ask you a good question. When you wake up in the morning and go to sleep in the evening and stand in front of the mirror, are you convinced that you've done everything in your power to stop this or not? And that's the question I want to ask you. You know, so I'll be like a good Jew, I'll answer your question with a question.
Juste, monsieur, après c'est...
First of all, thank you. It's always good to hear somebody who obviously knows what he's talking about and what happens on the ground. I would like to take up the question about the Geneva Initiative, but I want to know what you think about the people on the spot in Ramallah, in Tel Aviv, who work for the Geneva Initiative. Does it have a chance? Does it have a possible impact on the solution?
As far as I know, the work of the people around the Geneva Initiative is very diverse. Yeah, so I don't know everything. I don't know everyone. I know some people which I like very much. I think there is some very good work that is being done. And the way I look at it is that this is just another thing in terms inside all this conversation about where are we going and what we should do. But I must say one thing which is very much where I come from, and that is that, to say the truth, I'm not a big believer in peace. What I want is to end the occupation. And you know, if again I use the previous distinction I made between these two things, I think I would want a political initiative, yeah, that deals with the occupation as it is, yeah, and doesn't only look at the conflict as the big picture, because it might be that tomorrow we won't be able to solve the conflict, but the occupation, but it doesn't mean that the occupation is allowed to continue.
Oui, là-bas.
Thank you. I'm from an NGO called the Association for the Prevention of Torture. You made me think a bit about prevention, but my question is about the treatment of Palestinian detainees by IDF soldiers. If you could
say a little bit something about it. And what I would be particularly interested is to know how much discretion the individual soldier has about how to treat a detainee, or how much instruction he gets about this. Thank you.
So the truth is, you actually hit an issue that the IDF's involvement in is very small. Interrogations are usually conducted by the Secret Service, and confessions are taken by the police, so they will be admissive in court. And the IDF's involvement is only in the arrest, the transfer of the detainees until interrogation. Okay, so it's not too much when you talk about, torture or what takes place within interrogation rooms. That's not much. That's not something that we can touch so much because we don't have access to. You'll read the testimonies. You'll see there's many stories of beating detainees, of what we call drying them out in the sun or in the rain for hours. This is definitely not an order that comes from IHOP. From IHOP, the orders are usually the opposite. But this is definitely a norm in the way people behave on the ground. Yeah, you sit in the back of the Jeep, you have this guy handcuffed and blindfolded, you put them on the floor, you make some fun, you make some jokes about Arabs and Palestinians. One guy slaps him. If one of your unit members died in the last week, so you're really pissed off, so you'll beat them up more seriously. If, there is this gradual day-to-day behavior of a soldier towards Palestinians that is part of how you behave when you conduct an occupation, because this idea that you can occupy the Palestinians, that you can serve as a combat soldier in the occupied territories and still feel towards a random Palestinian guy in the street as he's equal to you as a human being is not really connected to reality. Because at the start of your role, right, your job is to treat them not as an equal human being to you. I've never broken into houses in the middle of the night in Jerusalem, and probably the police in Geneva doesn't do it. Yeah, but as I said, in Hebron, this is what I did 24/7. Yeah, so from the start of my mission was actually not to see people under me as equal to me. And that's why no wonder why this kind of behavior takes place. Yeah, that's part of the ceremony, so to speak, and that's part of the routine. There is units that are considered more aggressive. There is units that are considered less aggressive. There is soldiers in units that are considered more aggressive. There are soldiers less aggressive. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's not a pleasant experience to be arrested by the military. Again, we need to understand that when we say the word arrest, it's very, very different than what you think of arrest. Yeah, I never knew why I'm arresting a person. I never knew what the charges are. It's not an Hollywood scene of, you're under arrest for 1, 2, 3, you have a right to remain silent, and a lawyer will appoint to you if, yeah? Come in the middle of the night, grab the guy, handcuff, blindfold, throw him on the floor, and move on. Where does he go? He has no clue. I have no clue. When will he be interrogated? He doesn't know. I don't know. When is the next meal he's going to get? He doesn't know. I don't know. And continue the rest of the questions.
No. Please.
Just a follow-up. As a commander and as a soldier, do you know the Geneva Convention from the ICRC? And do you think that IDF is respecting now this convention?
I'll tell you the truth. As a soldier, the only thing I knew about the Geneva Convention is that I had a small paper in my pocket that said the blood type that I have and my serial number, and I was told that if I fall captive, this is the only thing I should give to the people who capture me. That's what I knew about the Geneva Convention and international law. And I think that tells you something about the level of knowledge and the place international law plays within training and the IDF and within day-to-day operations. Sorry to be so unproductive in that sense, but that's the truth.
You are Louisa Berlin, journalist. You are a soldier. Do you think it's more difficult to convince a soldier or political leaders to end the occupation. And I would like to have your opinion on representatives of the Knesset and others who were quite committed in discussions with the Palestinians. I'm thinking of Avram Burg, I'm thinking of Irpin Espas and others. Do you find today in Israel MPs or political leaders ready to discuss with the Palestinians and to be ready to end and advocate for the end of the occupation and for the peace process?
I don't think that if a person was a soldier or not, that's the most influential thing about his opinion, whether the occupation should end or not. I think the question of ending the occupation is a moral issue, is a value system, is a question of values. Yeah, and I think that people who hold the concept that for some reason we have the right to strip the Palestinian people from their dignity forever, they don't have it because they were soldiers or because they weren't in the military. They have it or don't have it because there is something wrong in their moral perspective about the world, in my eyes at least. In terms of parliament members, MKs in Israel, members of the Knesset, at the end of the day, I would say we are in very bad times today. I think we don't find too much political voices within Israel who are really advocating to end the occupation. You know, there was actually, when the last round of negotiations, there was discussions in Israel about negotiations with the Palestinians. Just because you said the phrase peace process, I bring it up. And there was actually some parliament members from the Likud and also parliament members from Naftali Bennett's party, the Jewish Home, who said, we are not against negotiations. We are against anything coming out of them. Yeah? So I think one needs to, yeah, you can negotiate till tomorrow, just make sure nothing happens in terms of, you know, in a way, I think what we need to think and what we need to keep in mind is to get rid of this fetish of negotiations and develop this attitude that basically demands a result, an outcome that we can live with, that can take us to a place where both sides will live in dignity. Because that's the only way that we will have sustainable peace in our region.
I would like to just add a comment to what Mrs. Kahneman said and thank Mrs. Babecoff very much that you did speak and did meet a small private group of the Jewish community and not liberal only. My point is, as you say, diaspora is very important. The pressure of the diaspora can be important in Israel on our political leadership. I think 30 people of one little community, of which I have never heard as a Jew living in Geneva. I think it is important that you speak to a large number of members of the community, be it in Switzerland and in other European countries, and in associations such as the LICRA, the CRIF in Paris, the GIL here, and that it is a public Jewish, addressing the Jewish community, because what are we, all of us in association, being the Manifeste, being J-Call, we are trying to get a reaction, to trigger a reaction from the majority of the diaspora Jews to speak up, to do exactly what you are doing, breaking the silence. This is our only motivation. I think it has not been easy. It is not very easy, and we seem to be in front of a wall. So,
just one word. À partir de maintenant, vous pourrez donner le lien de cette conférence qui sera visible ad aeternam sur notre site déjà.
I think the issue is on your table. As I say to a lot of people, we are good soldiers. Give us orders, we obey them. So if you get the opportunity for us to meet Kriv, look.
Cannot guarantee the
No, we will be more than happy to come and show up and speak. You know, we always say in Breaking the Silence that our job is to talk with everyone who's willing to listen and yell and scream at anyone who's not willing to listen. So either we need to yell and scream or we need to talk, just tell us in advance and we'll do it. No problem.
And that's why I think all of us, representing Jewish and Palestinian diaspora, should join forces to make them and listen.
Excusez-moi, je dois donner la parole aux journalistes, là.
Anna Aznaour, journaliste. Israel government, est-ce que je peux poser ma question en français parce que je déteste mon accent en anglais. Est-ce que le gouvernement israélien sanctionne les citoyens qui refusent de faire leur service militaire et si oui, quelles sont ces sanctions? Et également, la deuxième question concernant les soldats qui font leur service militaire, ceux qui refuseraient d'exécuter des ordres qui humilient les Palestiniens, à quel type de sanctions ils s'exposent? Merci.
Are there sanctions for the military person who don't want to do
Look, there is a refusenik movement in Israel. There's different groups who call for different things. There's people who call for young Israelis to refuse the draft. There's people who call to refuse the reserve duty, because military service in Israel doesn't end after the draft. Every year until the age of 41 month reserve duty. So there's people who refuse to serve in the occupied territories. There's people who refuse to serve at all. There's people for different reasons, for being pacifists, for political reasons. So they exist, but it's very much at the fringe of the left. And usually the way it works today is that if you refuse the draft, you will definitely be sent to jail for some months. But if you refuse reserve duty, it's not necessary that you will pay in jail time. Sometimes exactly the opposite, because the system understands that sending people to jail just fuels the movement. So they don't send them to jail. Still, it is important to understand that in Breaking the Silence, we are not a refused group. We do not advocate to people to refuse to serve, just like we don't advocate to people to serve. This is not something we say for either side. Some members of Breaking the Silence refuse their reserve duty. Some members do not. This is a private decision by each individual in Breaking the Silence. I think we understand that the story of limiting the question into refusal is something that is not at the base of what we're trying to do. Because look, no one calls my father to reserve duty. Is he less responsible for what I've done in the occupied territories? To refuse or not is something that I, as an individual, can decide. But there's too many people in the picture that are not in a place, where they have to face that question. But their responsibility for the occupation is not less than mine.
Last question.
Thank you. Jan Grefstad of the Children of Gaza. It's a humanitarian organization. I have a question. What do you reach a conclusion into your revelations? Because, I mean, you stopped the occupation, and then what? You're pro-Israel, for Israel, fine, but that means that you're for a two-country solution, I imagine. Now, there could be, in long term, there could be other possibilities like a federation, but a very long term, of course. I mean, it's not just down the road. But what do you see the continuation as Israel as it is now, with the wall and everything, and a split Palestinian territories, the Gaza and the occupied separately? How do you view the future? Thank you.
I think the way I view the future and what I want are two different things. sadly enough, the way I view the future is that I can see the status quo going on for a long more time. Yeah, you know, a lot of times I have déjà vus from before I was born. I'm 30 years old, and I'm sure that 32 years ago, people said this cannot go on, and here we are, 32 years after, and it's still going on. And actually, we are in a political reality that is way worse than when we were. Yeah, because today the occupation in a way is in the best situation ever. There is no political price. There is no economic price. Thank God there is no security price. Yeah, most of Israelis walk with the feeling, if it ain't broken, why fix it? Now, the bottom line is, if you ask me what I want, the answer is very clear. I want an end to Israel's control over Palestinians. I want to live in a reality where my military is an instrument of defense and not an instrument of oppression. I want to live in a neighborhood where I live with my neighbors as equal and not as someone who controls them. I don't understand why this is something so complicated and hard to grasp. Very basic in my eyes. I want to live in a democratic country. I don't want to live in a country that controls other people without rights. That's what I want.
Thank you very much. Et merci au Manifeste d'avoir organisé cette conférence. Rendez-vous devant le buffet, vous pouvez continuer à discuter.